When 75-year-old Martha opened her door to welcome her son's new wife, she had no idea she was inviting her own destruction. What this cruel daughter-in-law did next will leave you speechless. She convinced her husband to throw his own mother out on the streets. But when a mysterious stranger found Martha crying alone, what happened next shocked everyone. The autumn leaves danced gently outside the large Victorian home on Maple Street in suburban Chicago, as Martha Elizabeth Wilson sat in her favorite armchair, carefully arranging fresh flowers in a crystal vase. At 75 years old, her weathered hands moved with the practiced grace of someone who had spent decades creating beauty in small moments. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the lace curtains she had hung 43 years ago when she and her late husband Robert first bought this house. Martha had been alone for 7 years now, ever since Robert passed away from a sudden heart attack. The four-bedroom house felt enormous without his booming laugh echoing through the halls, but she couldn't bear to leave. Every corner held memories: the kitchen where they had shared morning coffee for 38 years, the living room where they had watched their only child David take his first steps, the bedroom where Robert had whispered "I love you" for the last time. Her son David was now 45 years old, a successful accountant who lived across town with what Martha had thought was a stable bachelor life. But everything changed 3 months ago when David called with news that made Martha's heart soar with joy. "Mom, I want you to meet someone very special," David had said over the phone, his voice carrying an excitement Martha hadn't heard since he was a teenager. "Her name is Sarah, and I think she's the one. We're talking about marriage." Martha had been overjoyed. At 45, David had never been married, and she had secretly worried that he would end up alone like she was now. The prospect of a daughter-in-law, and perhaps even grandchildren, filled her with a happiness she hadn't felt in years. When David first brought Sarah to Sunday dinner 6 weeks ago, Martha had been immediately struck by how beautiful the young woman was. Sarah Mitchell was 32 years old, with perfectly styled blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and a smile that seemed to light up the room. She worked as a marketing coordinator at a downtown firm and spoke with confidence about her career and ambitions. "Mrs. Wilson, your home is absolutely gorgeous," Sarah had gushed, admiring the antique furniture and family photographs that covered every surface. "David told me so much about growing up here. You must have such wonderful memories." Martha had beamed with pride, showing Sarah through the house, pointing out family heirlooms, and sharing stories about David's childhood. Sarah seemed genuinely interested, asking thoughtful questions and exclaiming over baby pictures of David that Martha proudly displayed on the mantelpiece. "Oh my goodness, he was such a cute baby." Sarah had laughed, holding up a photo of 2-year-old David covered in chocolate cake at his birthday party. "Look at that messy face. I bet he was a handful. He was the sweetest child." Martha had replied, her eyes misting with happy memories. "Always so gentle and caring. Even as a little boy, he would bring me dandelions he picked from the yard because he said they looked like sunshine." David had wrapped his arm around Sarah's waist, beaming with pride as he watched his mother and his girlfriend bonding. "See, Mom, I told you that you two would get along perfectly." The evening had been magical. Sarah had insisted on helping with dishes, complimenting Martha's cooking profusely, and asking for the recipe for her famous apple pie. When they left that night, Sarah had given Martha a warm hug and promised to visit again soon. "I feel like I'm gaining not just a wonderful husband, but a loving mother too," Sarah had whispered in Martha's ear. "I lost my own mother when I was young, so having a motherly figure in my life means everything to me." Martha had gone to bed that night feeling more content than she had in years. Finally, David had found someone who appreciated family, someone who understood the importance of tradition and love. Sarah seemed like the daughter Martha had always wished for. The wedding planning had proceeded quickly. David and Sarah decided on a small ceremony in Martha's backyard, surrounded by the rose garden that Robert had planted for their 20th anniversary. Martha had been thrilled to host, spending weeks preparing every detail to perfection. "I want this to be the most beautiful day of your lives," Martha had told them, her eyes shining with excitement. "Your father would have been so proud to see David getting married in the garden he loved so much." Sarah had seemed genuinely moved by the gesture. "Mrs. Wilson, you're making our dream wedding come true. I can't thank you enough for opening your home to us like this." The wedding day itself had been perfect. Martha had worn her best blue dress, the one Robert always said brought out her eyes, and had walked David down the garden path since Robert wasn't there to do it. Sarah looked radiant in a simple white dress, and her eyes filled with tears as she recited vows about love, honor, and family. I promise to love not just David, but to cherish and care for the family that raised such a wonderful man, Sarah had said, looking directly at Martha with what seemed like genuine affection. Mrs. Wilson, thank you for raising the man of my dreams. After the ceremony, as guests mingled in the garden, Sarah had approached Martha with a proposal that seemed like an answer to prayer. Mrs. Wilson, Sarah had said, taking Martha's hands gently, David and I have been talking, and we have a request. We know how much this house means to you, and how lonely it must get sometimes. We were wondering, would you mind if we moved in with you, just temporarily, while we save money for our own place? I would love to learn from you, and David misses being close to family. Martha's heart had nearly burst with joy. Not only was she gaining a daughter-in-law, but David would be living under her roof again. The empty bedrooms would be filled with laughter and conversation. She would have family around the dinner table every night. Oh my dear, Martha had said, tears streaming down her face, nothing would make me happier. This house is meant to be filled with family. David had hugged her tightly. Thanks, Mom. Sarah thought you might like the company, and honestly, I've missed living here too. It'll be good for all of us. For the first 2 weeks after David and Sarah moved in, Martha felt like she was living in a beautiful dream. Sarah would join her for morning coffee, sharing stories about her work and asking Martha about her youth. In the evenings, the three of them would watch television together in the living room, just like Martha and Robert used to do with young David. Sarah seemed fascinated by Martha's stories about the neighborhood's history, about raising David as a single mother for several years when Robert was deployed overseas in the army, and about the traditions that had shaped their family life. I never had grandparents, Sarah would say wistfully. My parents were older when they had me, and their parents had already passed away. I feel like I'm getting a glimpse into what I missed. Martha would pat Sarah's hand gently. Well, you have a grandmother figure now, dear. I may not be your biological grandmother, but I already love you like a daughter. But somewhere around the third week, Martha began to notice subtle changes in Sarah's behavior. It started with small things that Martha tried to dismiss as adjustment period stress. Sarah began sleeping late in the mornings, missing their coffee chats. When Martha gently asked if everything was all right, Sarah responded with slight irritation. I work hard all day, Martha. I need my sleep. Not everyone is a morning person like you. The use of her first name instead of Mrs. Wilson or Mom struck Martha as odd, but she reasoned that Sarah was trying to be more familiar now that they were living together. Then came the criticism disguised as helpfulness. Martha, I noticed the guest bathroom hasn't been updated in decades, Sarah mentioned casually one evening. The fixtures are really outdated. David and I were thinking we could help you modernize a bit. Oh, that's sweet of you to offer, Martha replied. But Robert and I chose those fixtures together. They hold sentimental value for me. Sarah's smile became slightly strained. Of course, but sometimes holding on to the past prevents us from moving forward. I'm just thinking about property values and practicality. Martha noticed David nodding along with his wife's suggestion, and she felt a small pang of hurt. Those fixtures weren't just old, they were part of the home's character, part of her history with Robert. The suggestions became more frequent and insistent. Sarah criticized the outdated kitchen appliances, the dusty antique furniture, and the cluttered family photographs that covered the walls. I understand these things have meaning for you, Sarah would say with patronizing patience, but living in the past isn't healthy. Maybe it's time to let go of some of this old stuff. Martha began to feel uncomfortable in her own home. Rooms that had once been sanctuaries filled with beloved memories suddenly felt like museums under Sarah's critical gaze. She found herself apologizing for things that had never bothered anyone before. I'm sorry the house isn't more modern, Martha said one day after Sarah made another comment about the dated decor. It's not about modern or old-fashioned, Sarah replied with a condescending tone. It's about creating a space that feels fresh and welcoming instead of like a shrine to people who are no longer here. The comment about Robert being no longer here cut Martha deeply. She had spent 7 years learning to live without her husband, but she wasn't ready to erase every trace of their life together. David seemed oblivious to the growing tension, or perhaps he was choosing to ignore it. When Martha tried to speak with him privately about Sarah's suggestions for changes, He would dismiss her concerns with frustration. Mom, Sarah's just trying to help. She has great taste. And honestly, maybe the house could use some updating. You've been stuck in the same routines for years. Martha felt like she was losing her son along with her sense of home. The David she had raised would never have spoken to her so dismissively, would never have suggested that her love for her husband's memory was something to overcome. By the 6th week, Sarah's mask began to slip more dramatically. The kind, family-oriented young woman who had charmed Martha during their courtship was being replaced by someone cold, controlling, and increasingly hostile. It started with the morning when Martha came downstairs to find Sarah rearranging the living room furniture. "What are you doing, dear?" Martha asked, trying to keep her voice gentle despite her shock. "I'm making the space more functional," Sarah replied without looking up from pushing Martha's favorite armchair into a corner. The furniture arrangement was blocking the natural flow of the room. "But that chair has been in that spot for 20 years, Martha said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's where Robert used to read his newspaper every morning. It's where I sit to watch the birds in the garden." Sarah finally looked at her directly, and Martha was startled by the coldness in her blue eyes. "Martha, Robert is dead. He's been dead for 7 years. It's time to stop organizing your life around a ghost." The words hit Martha like a physical blow. She had never heard Sarah speak so harshly, so callously about something that meant so much to her. "That's not fair," Martha whispered, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Just because Robert is gone doesn't mean our love should be erased from this house." Sarah's expression didn't soften. If anything, she looked annoyed by Martha's emotional response. "I'm not trying to erase anything. I'm trying to create a home for the people who are actually alive and living here now. Maybe you should consider what David needs instead of clinging to memories." Martha felt her world tilting. This was her house, her home filled with her memories and her belongings. How had she become an outsider in her own space? When David came home that evening, Martha tried to discuss what had happened, but Sarah had already spoken to him. His response shocked Martha to her core. "Mom, Sarah told me what happened today. She's trying to make the house feel more like home for all of us, and you're being resistant to any changes. That's not fair to her." "David, this is my home," Martha said quietly. "I'm not opposed to some changes, but I feel like Sarah wants to erase everything that makes this place meaningful to me." "Maybe some of those things need to be erased," David replied, his voice carrying an edge Martha had never heard before. "Sarah's right that you spend too much time living in the past. It's not healthy, Mom." Martha stared at her son, searching his face for any sign of the compassionate man she had raised. Instead, she saw someone who had been slowly turned against her by a woman who had clearly been playing a long game. "David, she's changing you," Martha said softly. "The man I raised would never speak to his mother this way." "The man you raised grew up and got married," David snapped. "My wife is my priority now, not catering to your nostalgia for things that don't matter anymore." That night, Martha lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The sweet, loving daughter-in-law who had seemed like a blessing had turned into something she didn't recognize. Worse, she was losing her son to this transformation. Over the following days, Sarah's behavior became increasingly aggressive. She would accidentally pack away Martha's personal items while organizing. She would invite friends over without asking Martha, treating the elderly woman like a guest in her own home. "Oh, Martha, I hope you don't mind," Sarah would say with false sweetness when Martha would come downstairs to find strangers eating at her dining room table. "I forgot to mention that I invited some colleagues over for dinner." Martha would retreat to her bedroom, feeling increasingly isolated in her own house. The home that had once been her sanctuary was becoming a prison where she felt unwelcome and constantly criticized. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening in November, exactly 2 months after David and Sarah had moved in. Martha had been in the kitchen preparing her famous pot roast, one of David's childhood favorites, when Sarah came in with an announcement that would change everything. "Martha, David and I have been talking," Sarah said, her voice carrying a tone of finality that made Martha's stomach clench with dread. "We've decided that this living arrangement isn't working out." Martha's hands stilled on the vegetables she had been chopping. "What do you mean?" I mean that having 3 adults trying to share one house is creating too much tension, Sarah continued, her blue eyes cold and calculating. David and I need our space to build our marriage, and honestly you seem unhappy with all the changes we're trying to make. Martha turned to face her daughter-in-law fully, seeing clearly for the first time the manipulative woman who had been hiding behind a mask of sweetness. Sarah, this is my house. I've lived here for over 40 years. Where exactly do you expect me to go? Sarah shrugged with callous indifference. That's really not our problem to solve, is it? You're a grown woman. I'm sure you can figure something out. Maybe it's time to consider a retirement community or assisted living. You'd probably be happier around people your own age. The casual cruelty of the suggestion left Martha speechless. Sarah was talking about throwing her out of her own home as if she were discussing what to have for dinner. Does David know you're saying this to me? Martha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David and I discussed this together, Sarah replied with satisfaction. He agrees that you'd probably be better off in a place designed for seniors. This house is too big for you anyway, and honestly, maintaining it is becoming a burden. Martha felt the world spinning around her. Her son, the baby she had raised with such love and sacrifice, had agreed to throw her out of her own home at the suggestion of a woman he had known for less than 6 months. When David came home an hour later, Martha was waiting in the living room, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. Surely when she spoke to him directly, he would see how wrong this was. Surely the son she had raised would never actually go through with such cruelty. David, I need to talk to you about what Sarah said earlier, Martha began, but David cut her off with a sigh of irritation. Mom, we've already discussed this. Sarah told me that you got upset when she mentioned the possibility of you finding your own place. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Martha stared at her son, seeing how completely Sarah had twisted the conversation. David, she didn't suggest it as a possibility. She told me that you both had decided I need to leave my own house. It's not just your house anymore, Mom. David said, his voice harder than Martha had ever heard it. Sarah and I live here too, and we need space to build our life together. You can't expect us to live like we're still in college, sharing space with a parent. The words cut through Martha's heart like knives. I never asked you to live here, she said quietly. You asked if you could move in. I welcomed you with open arms, because I thought we could be a family. We can be a family without living in the same house, David replied, but his tone suggested he was merely reciting something Sarah had coached him to say. Maybe some distance would be good for our relationship. Martha looked at her son, this man she had sacrificed everything to raise, and saw a stranger. Sarah had systematically turned him against his own mother in just 2 months, and he was too blinded by infatuation to see what was happening. David, please, Martha said, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. This is my home. Your father and I built our life here. All of our memories are in these walls. I have nowhere else to go. You'll figure it out, David said dismissively, echoing Sarah's earlier words. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. Maybe this will be good for you, force you to start living your own life instead of dwelling on the past. Martha realized with devastating clarity that her son was lost to her, at least for now. Sarah had successfully poisoned him against his own mother, making him believe that caring for the woman who raised him was somehow unhealthy or wrong. That night, as Martha lay in bed listening to David and Sarah laughing together in what used to be David's childhood bedroom, she faced the horrible reality of her situation. In less than a week she would be homeless, thrown out of her own house by her only child, at the urging of a manipulative woman who had played a perfect role to get what she wanted. At 75 years old, Martha Wilson was about to lose everything she had ever held dear, and the most heartbreaking part was that her own son was the one pushing her out the door. But what Martha didn't know, as she wept silently in her bedroom surrounded by 43 years of memories, was that her suffering had been witnessed by someone who sees all pain, who hears every prayer for help, and who never abandons those who are truly innocent and alone. Her rescue was coming, though it would arrive in a way she could never have imagined. The morning of November 15th dawned gray and cold. matching the despair that had settled over Martha Wilson's heart like a heavy blanket. She had barely slept, spending most of the night packing her few remaining possessions into two worn suitcases that had once belonged to Robert. Everything else, the furniture, the family photographs, the kitchen items that held decades of memories, would stay behind for Sarah to dispose of as she saw fit. Martha's hands trembled as she folded the last of her clothing, each item a reminder of happier times. The blue dress she had worn to David's high school graduation, the sweater Robert had given her for their final Christmas together, the apron she had worn while teaching David to make cookies when he was 7 years old. A soft knock at her bedroom door made her look up. For a moment, her heart lifted with desperate hope that David had come to his senses, that he had realized the terrible mistake he was making. But when the door opened, it was Sarah who stood there, looking impeccably put together despite the early hour. "Martha, I wanted to check on your progress," Sarah said with false concern. "David's already left for work. He said goodbyes are too emotional for him, so he asked me to make sure you have everything you need." The casual cruelty of the statement, that her own son couldn't even face her on the day he was throwing her out, hit Martha like a physical blow. David, the little boy who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms, couldn't bear to look her in the eye as she left her home forever. "I don't need anything," Martha whispered, closing the last suitcase. "Everything I need is staying here with you, apparently." Sarah's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of satisfaction in her blue eyes. "Oh, Martha, don't be so dramatic. You're acting like this is some terrible tragedy when really it's just a new chapter. Change can be good for people your age." "People my age," Martha repeated, hearing the dismissive condescension in Sarah's voice. At 75, she was being treated like a burden, a relic to be disposed of rather than a human being with feelings and rights. "The taxi will be here in 20 minutes. Sarah continued briskly. "I've already called ahead to the Sunset Manor assisted living facility across town. They have a room available, and it's very nice, much more appropriate for someone in your situation." Martha stared at her daughter-in-law in shock. "You called an assisted living facility without asking me." "Someone had to take charge," Sarah replied with a shrug. "You weren't exactly being proactive about your housing situation. I thought you'd appreciate the help." The manipulation was breathtaking. Sarah had orchestrated every detail of Martha's removal from her own home, all while framing it as helpful assistance. Martha realized that this had been planned from the very beginning. Sarah had never intended to live peacefully with her mother-in-law. The sweet family-oriented act had been a calculated performance to get into the house and establish control. "I can't afford assisted living," Martha said quietly. "My social security barely covers basic expenses." Sarah's expression showed no sympathy. "Well, that's unfortunate, but it's not really our responsibility, is it? You'll figure something out. You always do." 20 minutes later, Martha stood on the front porch of her own home, holding two suitcases and feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. The taxi driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, seemed to sense her distress and helped load her bags without comment. Sarah stood in the doorway, no longer bothering to pretend warmth or concern. "Take care of yourself, Martha. I'm sure you'll be much happier somewhere more suitable." As the taxi pulled away from 428 Maple Street, Martha watched her home grow smaller in the rear window. The house where she had been a bride, a mother and a wife. The house where she had celebrated birthdays and holidays, where she had nursed David through chickenpox and helped him with homework. The house where she had held Robert's hand as he took his final breath. All of it was gone now, stolen by a woman who had played a perfect role to get what she wanted, and enabled by a son who had chosen his wife's manipulation over his mother's love. The assisted living facility that Sarah had chosen turned out to be a nightmare. When Martha arrived, she discovered that not only was there no room available, but the facility was under investigation for neglect and financial abuse of elderly residents. The director, really uncomfortable, explained that several families had recently removed their loved ones due to serious concerns about care quality. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't in good conscience recommend that you stay here," the director said gently. Whoever called to arrange this placement obviously didn't do their research. Standing in the lobby of the failing facility with her two suitcases, Martha realized that Sarah's choice had been deliberately malicious. She hadn't just wanted Martha out of the house. She had wanted to ensure Martha ended up somewhere terrible, somewhere that would punish her for being an inconvenience. With nowhere else to go and less than $40 in her purse, Martha made her way to Lincoln Park, a small green space near downtown Chicago where she and Robert used to take young David to feed the ducks. It seemed fitting somehow that she would end up here, surrounded by memories of happier times. She sat on a bench near the pond, watching the water and trying to process how her life had collapsed so completely in just 2 months. The November air was cold, and she pulled her thin coat tighter around her shoulders, realizing that she would soon need to find shelter for the night. Other people came and went from the park, joggers, dog walkers, young mothers pushing strollers. Martha watched them enviously, remembering when she had been part of the normal world, when she had a home to return to at the end of the day. As evening approached, the temperature dropped further, and Martha knew she couldn't stay on the bench all night. She was about to gather her suitcases and look for a homeless shelter when she noticed a man approaching slowly along the path. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, with shoulder-length dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He was wearing simple clothes, dark jeans, a white shirt, and a red flannel jacket that looked warm but well worn. What struck Martha most was his eyes, which were dark and kind, filled with a compassion that seemed to see straight into her soul. "Excuse me," the man said gently as he approached her bench. His voice was soft but carried easily in the quiet evening air. "Are you all right? You look like you might need help." Martha looked up at him, and for some reason she couldn't explain, she felt no fear despite being approached by a stranger in an increasingly empty park. Something about his presence was deeply comforting, like coming across a warm fire on a cold night. "I'm fine," she said automatically. The polite lie that elderly people often tell when they don't want to be a burden. The man smiled gently and gestured toward the empty space on the bench. "May I sit with you for a moment? It's a beautiful evening, even though it's cold." Martha nodded, moving her purse to make room. As he sat down beside her, she caught a faint scent that reminded her of something she couldn't quite place, something clean and comforting, like fresh bread or spring rain. "My name is Jesus," he said simply, extending his hand. "What's yours?" "Martha Wilson," she replied, shaking his hand and noticing how warm it was despite the cold air. "Jesus, that's an unusual name. It's more common than you might think," he said with a gentle smile. "I've been called many things by many people, but that's the name I prefer." "Martha Wilson, that's a lovely name. Very traditional, very strong." There was something about the way he said her name that made Martha feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in months. Not dismissed as people your age or treated as a burden, but acknowledged as a person with dignity and worth. "Are you from around here?" Martha asked, finding herself genuinely curious about this kind stranger. "I travel quite a bit," Jesus replied. "I go where I'm needed most, and tonight it seems like I'm needed here with you." Martha felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I don't think anyone needs to be with me anymore. My own son just threw me out of my house because his wife convinced him I was a burden." Jesus's expression filled with deep sadness, not pity but genuine sorrow for her pain. "Tell me what happened, Martha. I have time to listen." And somehow, sitting on that park bench with a stranger named Jesus, Martha found herself telling the whole story. She told him about David's childhood, about how she had raised him with such love after Robert died. She told him about Sarah's deceptive courtship, about the gradual revelation of her true nature, about the systematic campaign to turn David against his own mother. Jesus listened without interruption, his dark eyes never leaving her face. When she described Sarah's cruelty, his jaw tightened slightly. When she talked about David's betrayal, genuine pain flickered across his features. When she explained about the assisted living facility and ended up homeless, his hands clenched briefly into fists. "You loved your son unconditionally," Jesus said when she finished. "You opened your home to his wife with complete trust. You tried to welcome her as a daughter. And look where it got me," Martha said bitterly. "Homeless at 75 because I was too trusting, too naive to see what she really was." "Your trust wasn't naive, Martha," Jesus said firmly. Your love wasn't foolish. You acted with the heart that God gave you, a heart that sees the best in people and offers love freely. The fact that Sarah chose to abuse that love says everything about her character, and nothing about yours. Martha looked at him in surprise. There was something about the way he spoke about God, not as a distant concept, but as someone personal, someone he knew intimately. I don't know if I believe in God anymore, Martha admitted. If God existed, would he let a son throw his mother out on the streets? Would he let someone like Sarah destroy a family with lies and manipulation? Jesus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze focused on the darkening sky. God sees every tear you've cried, Martha. He heard every prayer you whispered in your bedroom as Sarah tore apart your home. He watched your son choose cruelty over love, and it broke his heart as much as it broke yours. Then why didn't he stop it? Martha asked, her voice filled with decades of accumulated pain. I've been a faithful woman my whole life. I went to church every Sunday. I raised my son to be good and kind. I took care of my husband through his illness. I volunteered at the food bank. I tried to live the way I was taught God wanted me to live. Why would he abandon me now? Jesus turned to look at her directly, and Martha felt something shift in the air around them. The cold seemed less bitter, the darkness less threatening. Martha, God didn't abandon you. He sent me to find you. There was something in the way he said it that made Martha's breath catch. What do you mean? Instead of answering directly, Jesus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something that made Martha gasp. It was a photograph, the same photograph of Robert that had sat on her nightstand for 7 years, the one she had been forced to leave behind when Sarah threw her out. How do you have that? Martha whispered, her hands shaking as she reached for the picture. Your husband asked me to give it to you, Jesus said gently. He wanted you to know that he's been watching over you, and he's very proud of how strong you've been. Martha stared at the photograph, then at Jesus, her mind struggling to process what was happening. That's impossible. Robert is dead. He's been dead for 7 years. Death isn't what most people think it is, Martha. Jesus said softly. It's not an ending. It's a doorway, and those we love never really leave us. They just love us from a different place. Tears began streaming down Martha's face as she held the photograph. I miss him so much. He would never have let this happen to me. He would have protected me from Sarah, would have made David see what she really was. Robert is protecting you, Martha. More than you know. He's the one who asked me to come find you tonight, before you had to spend even one night without shelter or food. Jesus stood up from the bench and extended his hand to Martha. Come with me. You're not going to be homeless, and you're not going to be alone. Martha looked at his outstretched hand, and despite everything that had happened, despite every reason she had to distrust people, she felt completely safe with this stranger. She took his hand and allowed him to help her to her feet. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere you'll be loved and cared for the way you deserve, Jesus replied, picking up her suitcases as if they weighed nothing. And Martha, your story isn't over. What Sarah and David have done to you won't be the final chapter. As they walked away from the park together, Martha felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. She didn't understand who this man was, or how he had her husband's photograph, but she knew with complete certainty that she could trust him. Jesus led her to a small apartment building just a few blocks from the park. The building was old but well maintained, with flower boxes in the windows and warm light spilling from the lobby. Mrs. Rodriguez has been waiting for a new tenant, Jesus explained as they climbed the stairs to the second floor. She's 82 years old, and her children worry about her living alone. She's been praying for a companion, someone kind and trustworthy to share her space. But I can't afford rent, Martha protested. Mrs. Rodriguez doesn't need money, Martha. She needs friendship. She needs someone to talk with over morning coffee, someone to share meals with, someone to care about, and who will care about her in return. You have everything she's looking for. Jesus knocked on a door marked 2B, and it opened immediately to reveal a tiny woman with silver hair and bright, intelligent eyes. Her face lit up when she saw Jesus, and she embraced him like an old friend. You found her, Mrs. Rodriguez said in accented English, looking at Martha with instant warmth. I knew you would. Come in, Mahika. I have soup ready and fresh bread. The apartment was small but cozy, filled with photographs of children and grandchildren, handmade quilts and the smell of home cooking. Martha felt something inside her chest unclenching for the first time in months. Maria has been alone since her husband passed 2 years ago. Jesus explained. She has family but they live far away and can't visit often. She's been asking God for a friend, someone who would understand what it's like to lose a spouse and feel forgotten by the world. Maria Rodriguez took Martha's hands in hers and Martha was amazed by the strength in those weathered fingers. I heard about what happened to you, my amor. That daughter-in-law. She is mala. Very bad. But you are safe now. We will take care of each other. See. Martha found herself crying again. But this time the tears were mixed with relief and gratitude. You don't even know me. Why would you want to help me? Because Jesus told me you have a good heart. Maria replied simply. And because no woman should be thrown away like garbage by ungrateful children. My own son lives in California now. He calls once a month if I'm lucky. We understand each other, you and me. Jesus set Martha's suitcases down near the door and prepared to leave. Martha suddenly felt panicked at the thought of him going. Will I see you again? She asked. Jesus smiled, and for just a moment, Martha could have sworn she saw a soft light around him, though it might have been a trick of the lamplight. You'll see me whenever you need me most, Martha. And remember, your story with David and Sarah isn't finished. Sometimes people need to experience consequences before they can find their way back to love. After Jesus left, Maria showed Martha to a comfortable bedroom with a window overlooking a small garden. The bed was made with soft quilts, and there were fresh flowers on the nightstand. This was my daughter's room when she was young, Maria explained. She's married now, living in Texas with her own children. The room has been waiting for someone who needed it. That night, for the first time in weeks, Martha slept peacefully. She dreamed of Robert, and in her dream, he was smiling and telling her that everything was going to be all right. Meanwhile, across town in the house on Maple Street, Sarah was discovering that getting what you want sometimes comes with unexpected consequences. The beautiful home she had coveted was beginning to reveal problems that Martha's careful maintenance had kept at bay. The old heating system chose that first night of Martha's absence to break down completely. The pipes in the guest bathroom burst, flooding the room and causing thousands of dollars in damage. David, faced with repair bills he couldn't afford, and a house that suddenly seemed empty and cold without his mother's presence, began to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. But Sarah was there to remind him that these were just temporary problems, that they would work everything out together. She didn't tell him about the strange phone calls that had begun that evening. Calls where no one spoke, but somehow Sarah could feel someone listening, judging, waiting. She didn't mention the feeling of being watched that made her uncomfortable in rooms that had once felt welcoming. Sarah had gotten what she wanted, but she was about to discover that some victories come with a price higher than anyone expects to pay. And Jesus, who saw all and loved even those who seemed unlovable, was preparing to teach both Sarah and David the most important lesson of their lives, a lesson about love, consequences, and the terrible power of treating God's children with cruelty. The real story was just beginning. 3 weeks had passed since Martha had found refuge with Maria Rodriguez, and for the first time in months, she was beginning to feel like herself again. The two women had fallen into a comfortable routine, morning coffee together while watching the sunrise through Maria's kitchen window, afternoon walks in the neighborhood, evening meals shared over stories of their younger days. Maria was teaching Martha to make traditional Mexican dishes, while Martha shared her knowledge of American comfort foods. They had become genuine friends, two widows who understood each other's loneliness and found comfort in shared companionship. You know, Martha, Maria said one morning as they sat with their coffee, I think God sent you to me as much as he sent me to you. This old apartment hasn't felt so alive in years. Martha smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. I feel the same way, Maria. I was so angry at God when David threw me out. I thought he had abandoned me. But maybe he was just leading me to where I needed to be. See, mi amor. Sometimes God's plan looks like punishment at first, but then we see it was really salvation. Meanwhile, at 428 Maple Street, the house that Sarah had been so eager to claim for herself was becoming a source of constant stress and frustration. The heating system failure had been just the beginning. The next week, the ancient electrical system had begun shorting out, plunging entire sections of the house into darkness without warning. The week after that, the roof had started leaking during a rainstorm, causing water damage to the beautiful hardwood floors that Sarah had admired. David was drowning in repair bills that his accountant's salary couldn't cover. He had been forced to take out a second mortgage on the house just to pay for the emergency repairs, and contractors kept finding more problems hidden beneath Martha's decades of careful maintenance. "I don't understand it," David complained to Sarah one evening as they sat in the living room, listening to the strange creaking sounds the house had begun making at night. "Mom lived here for 40 years without any major problems, and now everything is falling apart at once." Sarah, who had been growing increasingly irritable as her dream home turned into a nightmare, snapped at him. "Your mother probably just ignored all these problems instead of dealing with them. Old people do that. They let things fall apart around them because they're too set in their ways to handle change." But David was beginning to remember things differently. He remembered his mother constantly maintaining the house, painting rooms every few years, having the furnace serviced annually, replacing worn fixtures before they failed completely. Martha had been meticulous about home maintenance, not neglectful. More troubling than the house problems were the strange occurrences that neither David nor Sarah wanted to discuss with each other. David had begun having vivid dreams about his childhood, dreams where his mother was taking care of him during illnesses, helping him with homework, celebrating his achievements. In these dreams, Martha would look at him with sad eyes and ask, "Why did you throw me away, David? What did I do to deserve this?" He would wake up feeling guilty and confused, wondering why he had been so quick to agree to Sarah's demands. The more time passed, the more he realized that his mother had never actually done anything wrong. She had simply been inconvenient to Sarah's vision of married life. Sarah was having her own disturbing experiences. She had begun feeling constantly watched, as if invisible eyes were observing her every move. Mirrors in the house would sometimes reflect movement that wasn't there. She would hear footsteps in empty rooms, or catch glimpses of figures in her peripheral vision that vanished when she turned to look directly. The worst part was the increasing sense of guilt that she couldn't shake. Sarah had been raised in a broken home, and had learned early that manipulation and selfishness were the keys to getting what you wanted. She had never felt guilty about using people before. It had simply been survival, but now every time she walked through the house that she had stolen from an innocent old woman, she felt a weight in her chest that grew heavier each day. One evening in early December, as snow began to fall outside the windows of Martha's former home, Sarah was startled by a knock at the door. David was working late, trying to earn overtime to pay for the mounting repair bills, so she was alone in the house. When she opened the front door, she found a man standing on the porch. The same man who had been at the park 3 weeks earlier, though Sarah didn't recognize him. Jesus stood there in the falling snow, wearing the same simple clothes, looking at her with eyes that seemed to see directly into her soul. "Good evening, Sarah," he said gently. "My name is Jesus. I believe we need to talk." Sarah felt an immediate chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. There was something about this man that made her deeply uncomfortable, as if he could see through all her carefully constructed lies and manipulations. "I don't know who you are or what you want," she said, moving to close the door. "But you need to leave." Jesus placed his hand gently against the door, preventing her from closing it. His touch was firm but not threatening, and Sarah found herself unable to move away from him. "I want to talk about Martha Wilson," Jesus said simply. "The woman whose home you stole through lies and manipulation. The mother you turned her own son against. The elderly woman you threw out onto the streets with nowhere to go." Sarah's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Martha left because she wanted to. She wasn't happy here." Jesus stepped into the house without being invited, and Sarah found herself backing away from him despite her usual confidence in confrontations. There was something about his presence that filled the space with an energy she couldn't identify. Not threatening, but absolutely authoritative. "Sarah Michelle Patterson," Jesus said, using her full maiden name that she had never told David. Born in Detroit, Michigan, to parents who divorced when you were 8. Raised by a mother who taught you that love was conditional and survival required taking what you wanted from others. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. How do you know that? I know many things about you, Sarah, Jesus replied, walking into the living room, where Martha's furniture had been rearranged according to Sarah's preferences. I know that you've been searching your entire life for a home and a family, but you've been looking in all the wrong ways. Jesus sat down in Martha's old armchair, the one Sarah had moved to the corner because it reminded her too much of the woman she had displaced. As soon as he sat in it, the chair seemed to glow with warmth, and Sarah could suddenly picture Martha there, reading or watching the birds in the garden. I know that when you first saw this house, you didn't just want to live here, Jesus continued. You wanted to erase Martha completely and take her place. You wanted her life, her son's love, her history. You thought if you could eliminate her, you could become her. Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, though she fought against them. You don't understand. I never had My mother was cold and selfish. My father left and never looked back. When I met David, when I saw how much he loved his mother, I wanted that kind of love for myself. So you decided to take it by destroying the woman who had it, Jesus said, his voice filled with sad understanding. But love can't be stolen, Sarah. Love can only be given freely. And the love you destroyed was irreplaceable. She was in the way, Sarah said defensively, though her voice lacked conviction. David needed to focus on our marriage, not on taking care of his elderly mother. I was trying to help him move forward with his life. Jesus leaned forward, his dark eyes never leaving her face. Sarah, what you did to Martha was one of the cruelest things a person can do to another human being. You didn't just take her home, you stole her dignity, her sense of worth, her relationship with her only child. You made her believe that the love she had given her son meant nothing. The tears Sarah had been fighting began to flow freely. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I just wanted the house to feel like ours, not like a museum to David's dead father. You didn't just want the house, Sarah. You wanted to erase 40 years of love and memory because it made you feel inferior. You saw Martha's deep, genuine love for her son, and instead of trying to earn that kind of love yourself, you chose to destroy it. Jesus stood up from the chair and walked to the mantelpiece, where Sarah had replaced all of Martha's family photographs with pictures of herself and David. He picked up their wedding photo, and Sarah gasped as the image began to change before her eyes. Instead of showing their happy wedding day, the photograph now showed Sarah and David on the day they had thrown Martha out. David looked conflicted and guilty, while Sarah's face showed cold satisfaction. In the background, barely visible, was Martha's silhouette carrying her suitcases, bent with grief and abandonment. This is who you really are, Sarah, Jesus said, holding up the photograph. This is the moment that defines you, the moment you chose cruelty over compassion, selfishness over love. Sarah collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. I know I was wrong. I know I hurt her, but I can't take it back now. David won't even talk about her anymore. He's convinced himself that what we did was right. David is drowning in guilt and regret, Jesus corrected her. He's just afraid to admit it, because that would mean facing what he's become. But you can still make this right. Sarah, you can still choose to be better than you've been. How? Sarah asked desperately. How can I fix something this terrible? Jesus sat down beside her on the couch, and his presence filled Sarah with a peace she had never experienced before. For the first time in her life, she felt truly safe, truly seen, truly understood. You can start by telling David the truth, Jesus said. Tell him that you manipulated him into turning against his mother. Tell him that Martha never did anything wrong, that she was only guilty of loving him too much to see what you were doing. He'll leave me, Sarah whispered. He'll hate me, maybe, Jesus acknowledged. But if he does, it will be because you built your marriage on lies and cruelty. Love that's built on deception was never real love to begin with. Jesus took Sarah's hands in his, and she felt warmth spreading through her entire body. Sarah, you've been searching for love in all the wrong ways your entire life. You've been trying to take what belongs to others, instead of opening your heart to receive what God wants to give you freely. What does God want to give me? Sarah asked, her voice small and broken. Forgiveness, Jesus said simply. Redemption. A chance to become the woman you were meant to be instead of the woman your pain made you become. A chance to experience real love, not love stolen from others, but love earned through kindness, compassion, and genuine care for other people. Sarah looked into his eyes and saw something that took her breath away. Despite everything she had done, despite the cruelty she had shown to an innocent old woman, there was no judgment in his gaze. There was only love, pure, unconditional love that she had been searching for her entire life. "I want to be better," Sarah whispered. "I want to be worthy of love, but I don't know how." "You start by making amends," Jesus replied. "You find Martha and you ask for her forgiveness. Not because you deserve it, but because asking for forgiveness is the first step toward healing. Then you help David find his way back to his mother, even if it means admitting that you were wrong about everything. And if she doesn't forgive me, if David leaves me when he learns the truth." Jesus smiled, and his smile was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Sarah, forgiveness isn't about whether you deserve it or not. It's about freeing yourself from the prison of guilt and shame you've built around your heart. And as for David, real love, the kind of love worth having, can only grow in soil made fertile by truth and honesty." Jesus stood to leave, but before he reached the door, Sarah called after him desperately. "Wait, who are you really? How do you know all of this? How do you know what's in my heart?" Jesus turned back to her, and for just a moment, Sarah saw him as he truly was. Not just a kind stranger, but someone whose love was so vast and deep that it could encompass even her broken, damaged heart. "I'm the one who's been watching over Martha while you made her suffer," he said gently. "I'm the one who heard her prayers when she cried herself to sleep in this house, feeling unwanted and unloved. I'm the one who found her when she had nowhere to go, and I'm the one who's giving you this chance to make things right." "Are you?" Sarah began, but couldn't finish the question. "I'm someone who loves you, Sarah, even though you've done terrible things. I'm someone who believes you can choose to be better, starting right now. The question is, what are you going to choose?" After Jesus left, Sarah sat in the living room for hours, holding the wedding photograph that still showed the truth of who she had become. The house around her creaked and groaned, as if the very walls were mourning the love that had been driven out. When David came home near midnight, exhausted from another day of trying to keep up with mounting bills and house repairs, he found Sarah waiting for him with red eyes and a broken expression. "David," she said, before he could even take off his coat, "I need to tell you something. I need to tell you the truth about your mother." And so in the living room of the house that Martha had filled with love for 40 years, Sarah began the most difficult confession of her life. She told David about her manipulation, about her deliberate campaign to turn him against his mother, about her lies and calculated cruelty. David listened in growing horror as he realized how completely he had been deceived, how easily he had been turned against the woman who had given him life and love. By the time Sarah finished speaking, he was crying not just for his mother, but for the man he had allowed himself to become. "Where is she?" he asked through his tears. "Where is my mother? What happened to her after I threw her out?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "I arranged for her to go to an assisted living place, but I chose a terrible one on purpose. I wanted her to suffer." David stared at his wife, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "You wanted her to suffer? She's a 75-year-old woman who never hurt anyone in her life, and you wanted her to suffer?" "I was jealous," Sarah confessed. "I was jealous of how much you loved her, jealous of the relationship you had, jealous of everything she represented that I never had. I thought if I could get rid of her, I could take her place in your heart." David stood up abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. "My mother is homeless because of you, because of me. Because I chose to believe your lies instead of trusting the woman who raised me with nothing but love." "David, I'm sorry," Sarah said desperately. "I know I was wrong. I know I destroyed something beautiful and precious. But maybe we can find her. Maybe we can make this right." David stopped pacing and looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. Not love, not even anger, but complete exhaustion and disgust. "Sarah, what you did to my mother is unforgivable. What you turned me into is unforgivable. I don't know if there's any way to make this right." "But Jesus said," Sarah began. "Jesus? Who's Jesus?" Sarah realized that David hadn't seen the man who had changed everything for her. Jesus had appeared to her alone, giving her the chance to choose redemption without any external pressure. The next morning,
David began calling every assisted living facility, homeless shelter, and social service organization in the city, desperately searching for his mother. Sarah, despite her fear of facing Martha's justified anger, joined in the search. It took 3 days of calling and visiting locations before David finally found someone who remembered Martha. A social worker at a downtown shelter told him about an elderly woman who had briefly sought help but had been taken in by a friend before she needed to stay at the shelter. She was with a man, the social worker said. Nice-looking guy, maybe 35, very kind. He seemed to know exactly how to help her. Said his name was Jesus, which I thought was unusual, but he really seemed to care about her. Following the trail, David eventually learned about Maria Rodriguez and her address. Standing outside Maria's apartment building, holding flowers and fighting back tears, David prepared to face the mother he had betrayed in the worst possible way. When Martha answered Maria's door and saw her son standing there, her first instinct was to close it. But something in his eyes, genuine remorse, real anguish, authentic love, made her pause. "Hello, Mom," David said, his voice breaking. "I've come to beg your forgiveness." Martha looked past him and saw Sarah standing a few steps behind, and for a moment her face hardened with justified anger. But then she remembered the strange visitor who had found her in the park, remembered his words about forgiveness and second chances, and she stepped back to let them enter. The conversation that followed was painful and healing in equal measure. David confessed his weakness, his betrayal, his failure to protect the mother who had sacrificed everything for him. Sarah, with genuine tears, admitted her manipulation and cruelty, asking for forgiveness she knew she didn't deserve. Martha listened to it all, her heart breaking anew as she realized the extent to which she had been betrayed. But as she looked at her son, really looked at him, she saw not the man who had thrown her out, but the little boy she had raised with such love. "David," she said finally, "what you did broke my heart in ways I didn't know were possible. You chose a woman you'd known for months over the mother who raised you for 45 years. You believed her lies instead of trusting my love." David wept openly. "I know, Mom, I know, and I'm so sorry. I don't know how I could have been so blind, so weak, so cruel to you." Martha reached out and touched his face gently, wiping away his tears. "But you're still my son. You're still the little boy I held when he was sick, the young man I cheered for at graduation, the baby I prayed over every night. I love you, David, even though you broke my heart. Can you forgive me?" David asked desperately. "Can you ever forgive me?" Martha looked at Sarah, who was standing quietly with tears streaming down her face, waiting to hear if the woman she had wronged so deeply could find mercy in her heart. "I forgive you both," Martha said quietly. "Not because what you did was okay, it wasn't. Not because it doesn't matter, it does. But because holding on to anger and resentment would destroy what's left of my heart, and I'm too old to carry that kind of poison." Sarah collapsed to her knees in front of Martha's chair. "Mrs. Wilson, I am so sorry. I was jealous and cruel and selfish. I destroyed something beautiful because I was too broken to recognize love when I saw it. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging for it anyway." Martha looked down at the young woman who had caused her so much pain, and instead of the manipulative, cold person she had known, she saw someone broken and desperate for the very love she had tried to steal. "Sarah," Martha said gently, "stand up. You don't need to kneel to me." Sarah rose, her face streaming with tears. "I want to be better. I want to be worthy of the forgiveness you're giving me. But I don't know how." "You learn by practicing," Martha replied. "You learn by choosing kindness over cruelty, love over selfishness, truth over manipulation. It's a choice you make every day, sometimes every hour." David looked between his mother and his wife, seeing the grace that Martha was offering despite everything she had suffered. "Mom, will you come home? Will you let us take care of you the way we should have from the beginning?" Martha smiled, but shook her head gently. "David, I found a new home with Maria. We take care of each other, and I'm happy here. But I would love to be part of your life again, to have Sunday dinners and holidays together, to be a family again." "But the house is yours," David insisted. "It was always yours. We had no right to force you out." "The house was never what mattered," Martha replied. "What mattered was love and family. and treating each other with kindness. We can have those things without me living in the same house. As the afternoon wore on, the three of them talked through tears and laughter, pain and healing. Sarah shared her own broken childhood for the first time, helping Martha understand the fear and insecurity that had driven her cruelty. David faced the weakness in his character that had made him so easy to manipulate. And through it all, Martha offered something that none of them expected, not just forgiveness, but a path forward to become a real family built on truth instead of deception. When evening came and they prepared to leave, Sarah turned back to Martha one final time. "Mrs. Wilson, the man who helped you.
Jesus, who was he really?
There was something about him that I can't explain." Martha smiled, remembering the stranger who had found her in her darkest moment and offered hope when she had none left. "I think he was exactly who he said he was, dear. I think he was someone who specializes in finding lost souls and bringing them home." 6 months later, Martha Wilson sat in the front pew of a small church, watching as David and Sarah renewed their wedding vows. This time, with truth, honesty, and real love as their foundation. Maria Rodriguez sat beside her, the two widows having become sisters in every way that mattered. Sarah had moved out of the house on Maple Street, insisting that Martha should return to her rightful home. But Martha had chosen to stay with Maria, finding joy in their friendship and mutual care. The house had been sold, with the proceeds put into a trust that would care for both women in their old age. As Sarah spoke her new vows promises based on real love instead of manipulation, Martha thought about the mysterious man who had changed all their lives. She never saw Jesus again after that night in the park, but she felt his presence constantly, in every act of kindness, every moment of forgiveness, every choice to love instead of hate. The family that had been broken by cruelty and deception had been healed by grace and forgiveness, not because they deserved it, but because love, real divine love, specializes in making all things new. And in a small apartment across town, Maria Rodriguez smiled as she prepared Sunday dinner for the family that had chosen to include two old widows in their circle of love. Because sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we choose to create through kindness, forgiveness, and the mysterious grace of a stranger who appears exactly when hope seems lost. What an incredible journey we've just witnessed together. Martha's story shows us something profound about the human heart, that even in our darkest moments, when those we love most betray us, redemption is still possible. Think about Sarah for a moment. She could have been the villain of this story forever, but she made a choice that changed everything. When Jesus confronted her with the truth about her actions, she didn't make excuses or blame others. She owned her cruelty and chose to change. That takes incredible courage. And Martha said, "Can you imagine the strength it took to forgive not just her son but the woman who deliberately destroyed her life?" At 75 years old, homeless and heartbroken, she still chose love over bitterness. That's the kind of grace that transforms not just individuals but entire families. But here's what moves me most. Jesus didn't appear to punish anyone. He came to heal. He found Martha in her lowest moment and gave her hope. He confronted Sarah not with condemnation, but with an opportunity to become better. He showed David the truth so he could find his way back to love. This is what real divine love looks like. It doesn't just comfort the innocent, it offers redemption to the guilty. It doesn't just heal the victim, it transforms the perpetrator. We all have moments when we're Martha suffering from someone else's cruelty. We all have moments when we're Sarah, choosing selfishness over kindness. And we all have moments when we're David, failing to stand up for what's right because it's easier to go along. The beautiful truth Martha learned is that love always makes a way, even when that way leads through the valley of betrayal and heartbreak. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between forgiveness and resentment? What was harder, being betrayed by someone you loved, or admitting you were wrong when you hurt someone else? Share your story below.